welcome to another Sci-Fi Fantasy Saturday. Today, we're going to unbox For What Remains, Blood on the Rails, created by David Thompson, published by Verssen Games, or as we know them, DVG Games. Now, this isn't my first in the For What Remains series. I also have For What Remains Streets of Ruin, which I picked up at my friendly local gaming store, and DVG was kind enough to send me For What Remains Out of the Basement and Blood on the Rails. So I do want to have a shout out to DVG and thank them for sending me this copy to unbox and to do what I may with it. I like this format of Sci-Fi Fantasy Saturday, where I kind of explore sci-fi and fantasy games, or games off the beaten path in the war game genre preferably, but sometimes I go beyond that. And this series fits squarely in with what I like to accomplish. This is sci-fi and it's a war game. So thank you so much to DVG for the opportunity to explore this game and this series. Now, and I'll put a link to my other videos in there if you guys want to catch up on that, and actually have done a little bit of gameplay on this series. Planning to do some more on that and some other things with this, along with this series as well. The back of the box here, you can see a setup of the board. This is a modular board, so these are individual tiles. The normal setup is a 3x3, so you'll have 9 tiles on the board. It is a grid format. It's not hex, so you're moving on a grid, and you can move diagonally, so that's something that's a little bit different. You have counters, typical quality DVG counters. When we get in the box, you'll see that are of different sizes. Sometimes you have huge counters for the huge characters that are in this game, and there's some of them in this game. And as you can see here, it's going to be based on a rolling 10-sided dice. As you can see, it's mostly a skirmish game. It's I kind of make this akin to a miniatures game that's been, reduced to counters. It kind of feels like that, and there's a reason why they use counters. We'll talk about that a little bit as I do the unboxing. Components: you get a rule book. Let's pull this up here a little bit. You get a rule book, campaign guide, 2 faction guides, 2 AI reference sheets, 2 ability reference sheets, 12 battleground tiles, 11 character cards, 11 AI cards, 69 character counters, 71 action counters, 6 scavenge tokens, 2 ability tokens, 1 ability template, 5 10-sided dice, and 1 action bag. So if you haven't seen any of my other videos on this, then as I said, this is a skirmish game. It's a chit pull game for determining your activations, but it's got a built-in AI or artificial intelligence system in here. So this is completely playable solo right out of the box. The rules themselves are really pretty easy and straightforward. The system is not that complex. The AI or solo system has a little bit of nuances to it, but again, not that overly complex either. So right out of the box, you can play this. Now, you're sitting here going, well, what's in this box compared to these other boxes here? Well, any one of these 3 are playable totally by themselves. Each one of these gives you two factions. This gives you 2 factions. For what Out of the Basement gives you 2 factions, and then of course Blood on the Rails gives you 2 more factions. So there are currently, and I say currently, I don't know what the plans are of this series, but currently there are 6 factions. So each one of these boxes gives you 2 of those factions. Each one of those factions are very asymmetrical. They have different characters that are in their faction. They have different abilities. So there's quite a bit of variety in any one of these boxes. I mean, you can play just with those two factions and have a lot of replayability and a lot of different games and skirmishes. And there's actually in the box there comes with a campaign guide that has several scenarios that you can kind of play through. You can play them individually, you can play them in order, and you can design your own scenarios, and there's kind of a point allocation system, so it's really easy to get into. But in each box, there's quite a bit of playability. I mean, you could be happy with just those two factions, but if you're like me, I'm never satisfied. I always want more. And so what you get in this box is you're going to get two new factions with very unique skills and abilities that you can bring to the table, and you can mix and match. You can play these two against each other, or you can play them against any one of these other factions that are in here. You can mix and match, and to your heart's content. So that's something that I really like about the system as well. Is number one, it's very easy to get into. Number two, it's very easy to solo. And then number three is the variety. It's easy to mix and match and come up with your own, scenarios and what have you. So with all that, that's quite a bit. Let's get into the box here and see what you get in a box of Blood on the Rails. There's also, I think on their site they sell templates that you can buy some more of the tiles. And you can actually buy dice. Each one of these have like white dice in them, but you can buy colored dice to divide up, I guess, among the different factions. They're just 10-sided dice. But there's also some tiles. I'm thinking about maybe looking into that. So you can take the tiles and come up with your own scenarios, kind of mix and match. The campaign book has set scenarios that tells you which tiles to use. As I said, it's normally a 3x3 grid. But I think there's a tile pack that you can get on DVG that can add more tiles if you want to have even more variety. So typical DVD box, sturdy, solid box there. That's something I'm trying to figure out. What I'm going to do is, currently if you know anything about me, which if you've watched some of my videos, you might pick this up. I like storing everything back in one box. I hate having a lot of boxes on the shelves. If I ever get an expansion for something, I try to put it back in the box. That doesn't happen a lot with war games. War games usually don't have expansions, or if they do come out with expansions, usually it's in its own separate box, and so you keep it in a separate box. These, I think I could probably put, I know I can combine at least two. I might even be able to combine all three into one box, but I haven't done that yet because I'm still thinking about how I want to do this. You've got a little box separator there. This is basically just to keep stuff in place. It's just cardboard. You can get rid of that. You have your dice here. And as I said, I think you might be able to get colored dice from DVG. You have your cards, which are very key to the game. We'll take a look at that. You get your draw bag. This is where you're going to put your orders at and pull from there. You get a rule book. We'll take a look at that. You get your two faction guides. These are the two factions that come in this box. Here's your campaign guide to go through the different scenarios, and they get increasingly bigger with more forces and more build outs. Here's a template. So at least one of the characters in this box here uses this as one of their attacks. So this will be kind of a fire blast. So of how it shows the affected area. So it's kind of a little template. If anybody's played any role-playing games or Dungeons and Dragons or anything like that, you're probably used to seeing some templates like this. Here are the tiles that you get. They're dual-sided. The one thing I will say about these, they're grid, they're fine. I think the art's fine. It's evocative of the theme that they're going for here, which is kind of a post-apocalyptic vibe. And the one thing I'm not wild about these, I wish they were a little bit thicker, although if the more thickness is probably going to be the more cost and harder to put under plexiglass and potentially warping, but still kind of wish they were just a little bit thicker. And it's not super thin. I mean, it's kind of poster board type stuff, but Anyway, so that's your tiles. You get it for that you build out in a 3x3 grid in your scenario. Here are your counters, and good thickness there on the counters. DVG does really good thick counters, and they're somewhat pre-rounded, especially the round ones. So you know, no need for counter clipping if you're inclined to do that. So there's different characters, as you say. You see some of the regular size, and then you see some of these huge or larger size characters. They take up more space, and there's special rules on how they move and the like. And then you get these round ones are your order activation shit, so to speak, that you're going to be putting in the bag. I'll talk a little bit about that as well. Here's another spacer, and then you get inspected by 111. All right. Then you get some player aids here. So you get, this is the ability reference cards. As I said, the game is relatively, the rules are relatively easy and straightforward. The only complexity here is the different abilities that each of these different characters, sometimes you have to read up on what it does and try to remember if they have a certain ability and when you can use it and what it does. And it's also in the faction books as well, but this is a nice little guide here that you can keep next to the table to figure out who does what and when, if you need that. Here's the for solo play, you have your AI activation. So if you're playing against the Soldiers of Light, I think, is it the Soldiers of Light? Or yeah, Soldiers of Light. This is their AI. It tells you, like, if they're engaged, what you do, injured, what they do, orders, what they do. That's going to be controlled by the cards here. I'll get into that. You rule on that, but this kind of gives you a brief little shorthand of what they do and what happens in those circumstances. And they're single-sided because you're going to keep that on the board when you're playing solo. For the Echo, this is their AI. So if you're playing against them, you'll keep this on the board as a nice little reference to know what they do. For the Soldiers of Light, you'll keep this on the board if you're playing against them. The other sets have those as well. So every faction has their own AI. This is just a force roster. I recommend this. You probably either want to laminate it or copy it or what have you. You can keep track of notes and names, and so as you're mainly for, like, maybe for the campaign, you can kind of keep track of how you're developing and how each of the different characters are developing along the way as well. So let's get back to the rule books here. So for the rules, and all the rules, I think all the rule books are generally the same, but they make them specific to this box. So the Blood on the Rails has this rule book with it's just, I think the only thing they really change is the art. I don't know if they change really anything else. Everything else is should be the rules should be, I think, the same, which kind of makes it kind of a series set. And I generally like series rules because I have a lot of games, don't get to play all of them as much as I want, and so when I come back to a game, I really like if it's a series, because then okay, that's more familiar and I kind of pick it up a little bit quicker. Whereas and so having a series rule book lets you play a lot of different variety of games in different aspects and just have to learn the specifics. So in this case, the only specifics that are different will probably be in the faction books here. We're talking about the different characters, but the general rules are the same. Full color, here's a sample of a layout here. As you can see, it's a 3x3 grid. You're going to have your cards out here. We'll talk about those in a second. It's a little bit of background. This is a made-up post-apocalyptic storyline from David Thompson, and there might be some others that helped him out with it, but basically it's his creation or their creation to set up this world and what happened, and each of these factions play a role. They'll introduce you to, there's a timeline in this book as well, but they'll introduce you to what happened, how it happened, and what these factions, how they fit into that world, but also their uniqueness. Each one of these factions have unique abilities, very asymmetrical abilities that will play out on the board if you pick that faction, and how they interact with the other factions that have their unique set of abilities. So as I said, there's quite a bit of versatility, replayability, and a lot to discover in here. Here's your different factions. The Freeman Coalition and the Combine that came in the Streets of Ruin. The Echo and the Soldiers of Light are in this set, and then the Earthen and the Order of the New Dawn came in out of the basement. In kind of just a summary, the Order of New Dawn are kind of the baddies. Those are the ones that are coming from a upside down world, so to speak. Kind of, it looks like upside down there, a la the golly, why am I drawing a blank on that series, the Netflix series, Stranger Things? There he is. That's an alternate universe that or dimension that's been opened up through use of nuclear weapons, and then of course there's been a kind of apocalyptic event that has led to a lot of the world being destroyed. And these are kind of the baddies that everybody's trying to fight against. The Earthen were developed artificially to fight against them. The Freemen are basically the leftover humans. They're kind of a rebel type force. The Combine are kind of cybernetic, and they're the government, so to speak. They're kind of controlling areas. And then these Echo and Soldiers of Light that come in this box are really kind of different factions. The Soldiers of Light are kind of zealots and that really don't believe in any kind of technology, and are really kind of fighting against that. But then they have some special abilities. They're kind of like beastmasters of sorts. And then you have the Echo, which are have psychic powers. So they've developed and they were kind of developed, I think, part of the trying to fight these Order of the New Dawn. The Earthen were really genetically designed for it, and the Echo, I think, kind of came out of some of that to go against them. But so they fight totally different. They have totally different powers, and more on the psychic type realm. So, as I said, each one of these is very different and plays very differently. You got your characters. It talks about the character cards, and that's these cards right here. And as you can see from the layout of the cards, you're going to have their movement, their weapon range, close combat. This is how many dice you roll, and you're trying to get a hit on the dice. And if you get more than one hit, it doesn't matter. You just take one hit. But that's how many dice you get to roll, so it increases your chances to get hits. Range combat, that's how many dice you roll for range combat. Your defense, that's the number you have to roll over. So I'm rolling on a 10-sided dice. I have to roll a 6 or greater to hit the pyro if I'm fighting against a pyro. Then you have any special abilities. Now you notice here there's 3 columns because there are recruits, veterans, and elite, and that's what their cost is. So if you just want to start with a recruit pyro, then it'll cost you 3 on your build out. The scenarios range from anywhere like 10 points up to maybe 30 points, or you can design your own on how many build out points you want to have to make your force. But here on a 3, you're just going to use this column, and so it's going to have a move of 5 and so on down. As you see, as it goes up to elite, it might get better numbers. Like the range combat here, it gets 4 dice if you're elite, and it gets 6 defense. But it also gets these special abilities. And now we're back to the ability reference cards here. There's the Echo one here. Oh, that's not this, the AI. Here we go. So it gets some of these right here. This gets a Fire Blast. So you're going to look at what the Fire Blast does here. It gets Fire Blast. So it's got Fire Blast at each level, but then it's got Fire Immunity here, and then it's got Fire Mastery here at this elite level. But the recruit doesn't have Fire Mastery. So as I said, each of the characters are going to depending on your build out, is going to have different abilities. And so that's going to add to, your tactics and how you play it out. These action tokens, one thing about that's interesting about this game is, not only are you choosing what chits or activations you put in a bag, and so you're going to, you get like 3 activations, and you're going to put that in a bag, and that's that's your probability of what you're going to draw and who's going to act that turn. So you might put multiple, you get like 3 activations of each of these characters, I should say. There's 3 chits, but depending on the scenarios, how many activations you get to put in the bag each turn and draw for their activations. You might put all 3 of the pyro in. So I really want this one pyro to really move around the board or do something. So you might put all 3 in. That means nobody else on your team is going to have an activation that turn, or will have less activations depending on how many you put in the bag. So you can really make the decision. I really want to put a lot in there. So not only are you making a decision of your build out and your characters, but you're also each turn you're deciding, who do you want to use more. And then there's kind of a refresh period or exhaust period where once I pull those activations for the pyro, for example, well, the next turn I can't use those. Those are off to the side, and I have to put other activations in. Then they'll come back into play. So there's kind of it's more of a strategic or forward-looking aspect of the game. Of you're trying to figure out, well, what do I want to use this turn? What am I going to need to have next turn? Where are people going to be at? So you're kind of planning things out. But then again, like all good plans, they kind of go haywire when you start pulling out of the bag and realize, I'm not getting that person in the right position, or they're getting their chip pulled, and what are we going to do and how do we react to that? So really like that aspect of the game. As far as the counters, as you can see, there's two sides to them. So there's 2 sides to the recruit, 2 sides to the veteran, and 2 sides to the elite. What that means is when you take a hit, so like when the pyro, a recruit takes a hit, you'll flip to this side. When it takes another hit, it's gone. As I said, you're just rolling the dice. You're trying to get 1 hit. Even if you get 5 dice, over the number, you just take 1 hit and it will flip to the side. Once that side takes a hit, it's gone. So like if you have a lead out, then you're going to get 6 hits. It'll take 2 to get rid of that, 2 to get rid of that, and then 2 to get rid of that. So you eventually have anybody that's played a war game that has steps or step loss, it's that kind of concept. You take a hit, you flip it over, you're losing a step, so to speak. And that's one reason why I think this is, it'd be nice to see minis. It'd be nice to see these characters and all the cool stuff on a miniature board, especially with, everything's plastic nowadays, especially in the Euro world. It'd be kind of cool to see that, but because of this step system, I can see that's why they use counters, because it makes it easier to understand and keep track of what's going on there. You got your setup. Here's an example of a battleground here. And there's not a lot of different types of terrain. You have like elevated terrain, or you might have rough terrain, which costs extra to move through. You might have water that's cost extra to move through. Elevated terrain is going to block sight. So there's not a lot of terrain, but there's enough to make it interesting and enough that you have to maneuver around and utilize to your advantage. Based on the name of this scenario, there's going to be a lot of rails, I guess tiles for terrain in this set. And here's some of your examples of terrain here: elevated terrain, water terrain, difficult terrain, blocking terrain, and clear terrain. Here's here's a setup for an intro scenario here. And then it talks about your gameplay. And as I said, the gameplay is really not that hard. I mean, once you do your build out, it's a matter of, what activations you put in the bag, pull out the activations, move that person, and then you have certain actions that you can do in a turn. You can do close combat, range combat, move, use your special ability, or forfeit an action. So basically, it's use your combat abilities. If you are in a position, close you have to be next, range you have to be within range. You can move. You can use your special abilities, or just forfeit that action. If you decide I don't want to do anything with that character that turn. And that's about it. The rest of this is just your general combat. So like here's that blast template we were talking about. It's about how you move, what's range combat, what's line of sight. Again, for war gamers, old hat stuff, right? We all know what's going on there. Here's some examples of movement. And then the huge characters move a little bit different because they don't necessarily, some of the terrain doesn't really affect them because they're so big, they're just kind of moving through those areas. But they're also easier to hit too, because they take up a little bit more space, so they might have a little bit better line of sight. Here's you're talking about campaigns, and then you go into the solitaire play, which is really a kind of a neat aspect of this game is for each of these cards, it's not just a general solitaire system where, all right, now what does the other side do? And the other side does whatever it does. In total, it's each, you're going to pull out, again, tokens out of here, and then that character for the other side, for the AI, will do what you pull out. So let's say I pull out the Mindbender here. I'll figure out, am I engaged? So if it's engaged, then you roll the dice and it does one of these things. If it's injured, it does one of these things. If otherwise, then you roll for orders, and then it will do what's on these orders. It might move, it might go for an objective. Some scenarios have certain objectives that they're going for, so it's going to try to accomplish that objective. Scavenger, there's some tokens on the board that are just things that make you, that are kind of like mini objectives, and you go after those, and so it might do that. And then there's like or it might do like an assault move, so it's going to like do a combat. So each one of the characters on your board, and you might have multiple Mindbenders, and it might have different orders for each one. It will stick with that order until it accomplishes that task. So if it's on objective, and there's an objective in the scenario, that counter is going to keep going for that objective until it accomplishes it. But it's unique to that character, that Mindbender character. If there's two Mindbender characters, then the other one might have a different order, and it will do whatever it's doing on this board. And so each character has its own solo AI, its own artificial intelligence of what it's going to do. And the first time it's activated, you roll for it, and it's going to stick with that order until you have to until it's accomplished, and then you'll roll another one for it. So as you can see here, it's a little bit more involved than just, all right, what does the other side do now? What units does it move? No, it's based on this activations, and it's unique to that activation. So you've got cards for each of your units there, and then of course here's the AI for the Soldiers of Light and what it does, and they're all, as I said, very unique to that character. So gives you a feel for the characters in here. Oh, we get a Waste Dragon. Look at that. So so that's how solitaire play is. Not that hard, and it plays pretty well. Now, it's not as I said, it's built in. It's a very solid solitaire system. It does have some glitches, so to speak. I mean, like any solitaire system, it's not perfect. And so there's sometimes you might look at it and say, it's not really, doing what I think it needs to do. And you can always make it harder, right? You can always say, no, that unit's not doing anything. You can make it more of a challenge for you and let it do something if you think it's a little off script. But for the most part, it does cover all the different things that it needs to do. Then you get into how things came to be. So this is this timeline, and I might actually do one of my Coffee with Kilroy or maybe another Sci-Fi Fantasy Saturday, and just maybe go over this timeline a little bit so you can learn a little bit more about this world. It's kind of interesting. So you got a timeline of what happened, and that's kind of the background for all this world. And then we'll get into the faction books here. These talk a little bit more about the specifics of this faction. Like here's the Soldiers of Light. So it's going to tell you a little bit about their background. It kind of gives you an overview of what they look like from a combat perspective. And then you're going to talk about each individual characters. Here's the Beastmaster, and here's some of those special abilities that we saw in that other chart. The reference chart, it talks about what it actually does here. So, if you don't have enough information on your ability chart here, this is more of a shorthand, you can go into a little bit more detail in your faction book for each one of the characters, and it lays them all out on what their special abilities are and gives you a little bit more about them. And so you're going to have that for each one of the different factions. So here's the Echo. Talks a little bit about them and how they came about, some of their overall ratings. They look, as you can tell from a standpoint there, they look relatively balanced there and pretty good on the above average. Then you got their special abilities that they have for each one. Now here's the Pyro, that has that blast template that we looked at. So that's going to be like an area effect damage that it gets, and then shows you an example of that on the board. Then you have your campaign sheet, or your campaign book, which again is going to give you a little bit more background of what happened and where it happened. And so you get a little bit more understanding of the world and its background. And then you got scenarios. So this is like a skirmish points 10. That's like the build out points. And it's going to tell you how to set up. It's going to tell you if there's any scavenger tokens. It's going to tell you what the objective is. And then it also has it based up for solitaire play, whether you're playing against the Echo or the Soul in this case, and how you can play it. So you can actually play against the Echo and then pull a faction from one of the other sets and have them go up against them, and it fits just as nicely. And so you have different scenarios, and they usually are increasing in skirmish points, so they're becoming a little bit more involved scenarios with a little bit more going on. And then you get up to the big scenario here, which is 30 points, and it's got a lot of different victory points. And a lot of times on the victory points is just, killing the other units. You eliminate the other unit, you're going to get so many victory points for each one of those. Sometimes it's getting points for the objective. The objective might be getting certain units off the board or units to a certain spot or what have you. So there's different objectives that could be going on. And so each scenario is different. Plus, you can make up your own. I mean, it's not too hard to throw out, the tiles, figure out what force you want, and then just play it as an AI, right? Again, it's not that hard to get into that. So that is what you get in a box of For What Remains. Blood on the Rails. Quite a bit of good stuff in this box. I like this series. I like what's going on here. As I said, there's only 3 of these right now, three sets, which gives you 6 factions. So there's quite a lot there. You can play with any one of these boxes. You can just be happy with just this box and going against these 2 factions. But there's 6 factions in total that you can get into in this game. And anyway, I'm enjoying it. I like it. I'm not a super miniatures person. I've dabbled a little bit with that. This feels very accessible for getting into, and understanding kind of how sometimes miniature games works, miniature skirmish type games. And that's really what this is, except that it's, it's with counters because you have the step loss stuff. So anyway, hope that's helpful. Thank you for spending some time with me today on Sci-Fi Fantasy Saturday. As always, I appreciate any time you spend with me. I know your time is precious, and it really does mean something to me for anybody that comes by and likes, and especially anybody who comments. Really love that, and love to hear what you think about this. Anyway, that's what I have for today. Thanks again to DVG for this copy. Really appreciate that, and I really appreciate you all. Thanks for watching.